All right. I'd like to start off by saying Barakatah Yahweh, Hashem Yahushai, Hashem Chakadash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is the Samaritans. And Lord's will, I'm going to go into a little bit of the history on the Samaritans and why the Lord Yahushai mentioned not to go to them, which that's one of the scriptures we're going to read, and we're going to find out, why was that statement made. Now, you have this situation with Comfy and crew. They're down there in DC. I don't know if it was just a one-day thing or a thing for for a week or for however long they're protesting down at, I believe it was the Capitol building, if I'm not mistaken. And a brother had sent me the article, and then I noticed Apostle Hart did a video on it, and I was just meditating on that, and the way that IUIC, I'm sorry, not IUIC, ICGJC. If I said IUIC Salake, it was ICGJC, which is Comfy and crew. The way that they treat us, when the spirit of Hashem Yahushai delivered us from the main school back then, when all that tyranny was going on, they call us rebels. They call us a rebel camp, and any other camp out there that came out of One West that is not down with ICGJC right now, they're called rebel camps, whether it's ISUPK, IUIC, GOCC, GMS, or whatever other camp, Zabat, whatever other camp that came out of One West, they consider us all to be rebels. So that ties into the lesson because, this, by understanding that today and understanding the history of what was going on back then, you get a clearer mindset as to why the Jews back then that were in Judea, that were in Israel, Palestine, had a disdain for those Israelite foreigners, and especially for those Israelites that ran into Shechem. Now I'm gonna start off with this scripture, and then Lord's will, the Spirit will bring that back to memory, so that I can expound a little more through the Spirit on Shechem. So this is the book of Matthew, chapter 18, and I'm just gonna go straight to the point. 17th verse. This is dealing like if you and a brother have a quarrel, you're supposed to speak it out between yourselves, and then if the brother won't hear you, you're supposed to take 2 or 3 witnesses, and if the brother doesn't hear that, then you would take it to the congregation. And this is what would happen if he refuses to hear the congregation. It says, 17th verse, and if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as an heathen man and a publican. So this was the sentiment back then with these Israelite foreigners. And this is why today you have Comfy and crew that look at all the One West camps as rebels. Basically heathens, because we're not with them. But, what they're teaching is off. They brought into ICGJC, the Hebrew Israelite thing, they brought in Roman Catholic dogma, all the way down from the things that they teach to what they wear. The same color code, the same color scheme that the Roman Catholic Church is wearing, they're wearing, So why would you want to be involved in something that's teaching a false doctrine? And the scriptures speak about being delivered from unreasonable and unrighteous men, so that the word can have free course. So they're looking at us as heathens, the same way that the Jews back in Palestine were looking at the Israelite foreigners as heathens. And now we're going to get to it because I mentioned Shechem, and Shechem was a city in the northern kingdom, because when you go back to the law, you had what's known as a city of refuge. All right, and the city of refuge was a place where Israel, if let's say you're out in the field and you're working with a particular individual, another Israelite, a fellow Israelite, and let's say y'all hewing wood or you cutting down a tree, and let's say the axe head comes loose from the axe, you know, from the shaft, I guess, for lack of better words, and it flies and it hits that fellow Israelite in the head and it kills him. That was an accident. But when his family finds out, they're not concerned with if it was an accident or not. They were concerned with getting the blood, getting revenge on the person that killed their loved one. So what they would do is they would run to something called the city of refuge. And there they would remain, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they would remain there until that particular priest died. And then they would come back or something along those lines. I haven't read that history in a long time. But nevertheless, it was a place where you would go to receive refuge, you know, so that the family members of that particular individual didn't kill you. Now, the land of Shechem is situated, it was one of those cities that Israel would run to refuge in. And this was the whole premise behind those Israelites back then that were accused of breaking the laws or breaking the traditions of the elders. And instead of being judged, you know, and put to death or whatever the judgment was, they would flee to Samaria. They would flee to that to Shechem, to that place, to that city for refuge, so that they wouldn't, because, you know, they knew that they had asylum there, so to speak. And you had a lot of Israelites that were there that knew that they were Israelites, that knew that they were Jews, but they would stay there because they were accused, whether rightly or wrongly, of a crime against the laws or the traditions of the elders. So they would flee there for succor, for help. All right. So, and this is the reason why. And then on top of that, you had not only Israelites, but you had Cushites and you had different other nations that were all intermingled in that region. All right. And the Jews in Jerusalem had a utter hate and disdain. They had an utter hate and disdain for the Israelite foreigners, but especially those Jews that they would call apostates that were living among those Samaritans, you know. And that's the reason why, you know, matter of fact, when you go to the Josephus speaks about the apostate Jews that would flee to Samaria. I was trying to look for it online, I couldn't find it. But when you go there, they actually give you history on how the Jews that were accused of breaking the law would run to Shechem, would run to Samaria for refuge. And that's why they call them apostates, because they considered them to be pretty much heathens. So now now that you had Israelites there and you had the other nations there, you know, Jake is going to assimilate into the customs and into the attire of those different nations. All you have to do is look at the so-called Negroes and Latinos and the different tribes, the so-called Native American Indians. When the so-called Negro or Latino or one of the other tribes goes, let's say, for instance, to China, what do? They learn how to eat with chopsticks. They wear the Chinese garb. They wear the Chinese slippers. No, they start speaking the language. They start getting into some of the customs, whether it's Buddha or whatever it is that they worship there, because Jake assimilates into wherever they go to. Same thing if they go among the Japanese. Same thing if they go among the Arabs. Same thing if they go among the Hamites, you know, the Elamites. They assimilate into that nation's customs, their language, their way of thinking, their philosophies, their gods, and all of that. You know, so that's what was happening with Israel back then. That would flee into this city of refuge. And this is and it was hard for the disciples at the time because they were just learning. It was hard for them to be able to discern who was the Israelite from who wasn't the Israelite. And this is why Yahushua gave a strict commandment in Matthew 10:5. These 12 Yahushua sent forth and commanded them, saying, go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not. Why did he tell them not to enter into the city of the Samaritans? Because you had Israelites there, but you also had heathens there. And this is and how did those heathens get in there into that land? Well, let's go from there to the book of 2 Kings, the 17th chapter, and let's read some, we're going to jump around a little bit in this chapter because, beginning with Elder Apostle Tahar and the rest of the apostles and elders, you brothers out there that's been around for a while, the sentiment is you have to know secular history to understand certain situations that were going on in the Bible and the reason why there were quarrels or arguments, or particular things that were said, at that time. So if you know the secular history, you understand, oh, that's why so-and-so said this and that. For instance, when you read the scriptures, when the Apostle Paul said there's no difference between Jews and Greeks, right? Now, the plantation Christians, they try to apply that to all nations, that all nations could come into this. But wait a minute, aren't there more nations than just Jews and Greeks? Why did it specify Jews and Greeks? Because you had the Judeans that spoke the Hebrew language, and you had the Judeans that spoke the Greek language. And then you had the Israelite foreigners that didn't know that they were Israelites that spoke the Greek language. So he said there's no difference. Why? Because they're all the same. They're Israelites. But if you don't understand that history and going back to the Hellenization of the world back then and how Israel was caught up into that, and how they were Hellenized, and some of them revolted against it and some of them accepted it and took it in as a custom to themselves and to their families. So the descendants that were there afterwards were held in disdain by the Jews that felt that they were still keeping the laws of their forefathers, and the other ones had forsook it. All right. So this is going back to 2 Kings 17:1. It says, in the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, it says, and Shalom, to the Akim on the comment boards and to any Akwat that may be listening. In the 12th year of Ahaz, king of Judah, began Hoshea, the son of Elah, to reign in Samaria over Israel 9 years. Now this Hosea was a king among the Ephraimites, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, but not as the kings of Israel that were before him. So you had, when you look at the list of the kings amongst Judah, and you look at the list of the kings amongst Israel, you had certain Judite kings that were righteous, and you had certain Judite kings that were wicked. But pretty much all of the kings of Israel were all wicked. Why? Because that was the Lord's doing, because he was about to move them out of that land and move these other nations in. It says, against him came up Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, which Elder Apostle Tahar has brought out many times, that this was Shalmaneser the fifth. He was a king, the Assyrian king that was responsible for bringing out the Israelites out of Samaria and bringing in those other heathens. And Hosea became his servant and gave him presents. And the king of Assyria found conspiracy in Hosea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no present to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and bound him in prison. Then the king of Assyria came up throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it 3 years. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria in the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried Israel away into Assyria and placed him in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan in the cities of the Medes. And when you look at a map, you see that between the Euphrates River and the Tigris River, you had the northern kingdom that was brought into that land. And that's where they were tributary at. And this is the place where they actually sat down and had counsel to leave that land to go to a further land whenever mankind dwelt, to keep the laws which they weren't able to keep, that they didn't keep in their own land, which is what got them in that hot water. All right. It says, for so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their power, which had brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he had feared other gods and walked in the statutes of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out from before the children of Israel and of the kings of Israel which they had made. And that's why the Most High was so upset. It says, and the children of Israel did secretly those things that the power of Israel, Salakia, let me read that again. It says, okay, I skipped the page, Salakia. It says, and the children of Israel did secretly those things that were not right against the Lord, their power, and they built them high places in all their cities, and from the tower of the watchman to the fenced city. And they were doing this thing secretly. And this is why the Most High was so upset with Jake back then, you know, especially the northern kingdom. So jumping down to the 18th verse, because as you read on down, it tells you all the abominations they were doing. And you jump to the 18th verse, it says, therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only. See, also Judah kept not the commandments of the Lord their power, but walked in the statutes of Israel which they made, and the Lord rejected all the seed of Israel. So at one point the Lord pretty much in process of time got rid of all of the tribes out of the land of Israel. But during the time of the Babylonians, the kingdom of Judah fell to them, but eventually they were brought back by the Medo-Persians, and then all the way up until the Romans. They were still in their land, and then from 70 AD on, that's when Israel started to, that finally got all of them, all the tribes that got kicked out of that land and scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, as to what you see today. It says, and the Lord rejected all the seed of Israel and afflicted them and delivered them into the hand of spoilers until he had cast them out of his sight. For he rent Israel from the house of David, and they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king, and Jeroboam drave Israel from following the Lord and made them sin a great sin, because he made those two calves in Samaria, the things that are displeasing to the Lord. For the children of Israel walked in the sins of Jeroboam, which he did, they departed not from them, until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all of his servants the prophets. So was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. And that's what happened, right? Now, this is what the king did. And the king of Assyria brought Babylon, and from Cutha, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities thereof. So this is where you get these heathens later on down the line that were claiming the heritage of Israel, because going back to the king of Assyria, they were brought into that land and placed there instead of the northern kingdom. And just like Israel, when they were under the Greek captivity, assimilated to the Greek customs and called themselves by Greek customs, and professed themselves to be of the Greek nation. That's what these other heathens were doing with our nationality. They're doing even today, like they're doing even today, in the land of Israel today. You know, so there's a lot of history, you know, and a lot of twists and turns that if the spirit of Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua isn't guiding you through it, you won't be able to understand why certain things are written in the scriptures, and they become stumbling blocks. All right, so now let's go from there to Ezra chapter 4 verse 1. You know, and it's good every once in a while to go back over the history, because it freshens your memory, you know, and you know, and when you go into the New Testament, you know, you have a broader insight as to why certain things were happening or why certain comments were made. So this is Ezra chapter 4 verse 1. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the children of the captivity builded the temple unto the Lord power of Israel, then they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief of the fathers and said unto them, let us build with you, because this is during the time of the Medo-Persian Empire, when Israel was building back the restoration of the temple at that time that the Babylonians had destroyed. It says, these heathens wanted to help build the temple and the sanctuary with our forefathers back then, right? It says, for we seek your power as you do, and we do sacrifice unto him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Ashur, which brought us up hither. So their families were doing those things back then. So they wanted to get involved, you know, because they were placed there instead of Israel at the time. But Zerubbabel and Joshua and the rest of the chief of the fathers of Israel said unto them, you have nothing to do with us to build an house unto our power. We ourselves together will build unto the Lord power of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, hath commanded us. And this is why, Lord's will, we're going to get to the book of St. John, the 4th chapter. And this is why the Samaritan woman at the well, asked Yahushua, why are you speaking to me, asking me for water, when the Jews have no dinners with the Samaritans? Because going all the way back to this time, they were rejected from helping to build the temple. All right. So now let's go from there to the book of St. John, the 8th chapter and the 46th verse. And this is why them Jews, this was like an insult that them wicked Pharisees and them were bringing against Yahushua at that time. This is St. John 8 and 46. It says, which of you convinces me of sin? And if I say the truth, why do you not believe me? He that is of the Most High heareth the Most High's words. Ye therefore hear them not, because you are not of the Most High. So he was pretty much cutting them. So when he cut them like that, pretty much he told them that they were of their father the devil. And they got offended by that. And what did they say to him? Then answered the Jews and said unto him, say we not well that thou art a Samaritan and hast a devil? So why did they call him a Samaritan? Because it was already known that you had Israelites that would flee for refuge among these Samaritans, you know, and they were being called heathens by the Jews that were still living there. It's the same thing today that Comfy and them, when they call the different One West camps, they call them rebels. It's the same, sort of the same scenario, you know, or similar to it anyway. All right. So now let's go from there to the book of St. John, same book, 4 and 1. We're going to read a little bit about the Samaritan woman. St. John 4 and 1. It says, Now, when therefore the Lord knew how the Pharisees had heard that Yahushua made him baptize more disciples than John, though Yahushua himself baptized not, but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again into Galilee. And he must needs go through Samaria. Then cometh he to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near to the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And this was the land where these heathens were transported to. Now let's go from there real quick to the book of Genesis 33. We'll just hit that point real quick. Genesis 33 and 18. Just bear with me 1 second. Genesis 33 and 18. It says, and Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem. And this is where that land was located, where those Samaritans were brought into. It says, which is the land of Canaan, when he came from Padanaram and pitched his tent there before the city. And he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel, which is the power of Israel. All right. Let's see. They have a precept there, number 20. It says, God, the God of Israel. So, or the Most High, the power of Israel. All right. So this parcel of land that Jacob bought, he dug a well there, and that was the same well that this woman at Samaria was drawing water from. And this is where Yahushua went to her and asked her for this water. All right. So this is what she said. She said, then cometh he to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near to the parcel of ground that Jacob gave his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Yahushua therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Yahushua saith unto her, Give me to drink. Right? For his disciples were gone away unto the city to buy meat. Then said the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. So this, because you had heathens there, but you also had apostate Jews there that were considered apostates. And this is why Yahushua told the disciples not to go into the city of the Samaritans, because they weren't on the level at that time to be able to discern between who was the Israelite and who wasn't. Because remember, Israel had mingled themselves all up in the customs of those nations. All right, and that's the same thing with the Israelite foreigners that the Apostle Paul had to go to. They were wearing the Roman togas. You know, they were speaking Greek. Some of them were speaking Latin. You know, they were eating pork. They had no beards. They weren't circumcised. You know, like Timothy's father. And Timothy himself wasn't circumcised because of the rule of his father. And this is why the first thing that the Apostle Paul did when he took Timothy on his ministry was he circumcised him, because he knew that the Jews would have a problem with that. You see? So now reading on, says Yahushua answered and said unto her, If thou knewest the gift of the Most High, and who it is that saith unto thee, Give me to drink, thou wouldst have asked of him, and he would have given thee the living water. And pretty much Yahushua was messing with this woman, okay, because she wasn't an Israelite. And what the proof of that is when we jump on down to the 19th verse. It says, The woman saith unto him, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. Our fathers, see, worshipped in this mountain, because they were transported there by the Assyrians. And you say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Yahushua said unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when you shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship you know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. So basically he was telling her, you're not a Jew. You're one of those women that were brought into this land, you know, or you're a descendant of the forefathers of the heathens that were brought into this land, and you're not an Israelite. So he said, you worship you know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father seeketh such to worship him. And this is why Yahushua went there, because you did have Israelites among them. And this is why he tarried there for 2 days. And when you jump down to the 39th verse, it says, right, it says, and many of the Samaritans of the city believed on him for the saying of the woman, which testified, he told me all that ever I did. So when the Samaritans were come unto him, they besought him that he would tarry with them, and he abode there 2 days. And what did he do? He was teaching them, because remember, he came to the Israelite he came to the Jews first, and then they rejected him. So this is the beginnings of the Israelite foreigners starting to be brought back. But these were just Jews that knew that they were Jews, but they were caught up into the philosophies of them Samaritans at the time. Okay, so now let's go from there to the Apocrypha, and this will be the last scripture. This is the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 50 and verse 25. And now you understand what this means here in the Apocrypha, Ecclesiastes 50 and 25. There be two manner of nations which my heart abhorreth, and the third is no nation. Because this was something that was going on, even prior. Because, whenever the Jews were accused of a particular crime, they would run to among those Samaritans for refuge. And so this is written because of that, because Israel back then had a disdain for those Israelites. It says, so he's saying, two manner of nations which my heart abhorreth, and the third is no nation. They that sit upon the mountains of Samaria, which really, when you go into the Spanish and other versions, is Seir. It's talking about them heathens, the Edomites, right? And they that dwell among the Philistines, which we always had wars with the Philistines, right? It says, and that foolish people that dwell in Sichem, which Sichem was in the region of Shechem or Sychar, which is in the land of Samaria. So this is why the Jews in Jerusalem had a disdain for those Israelites that were among those Samaritans, because they considered them heathen. You know, but in order to understand that history or understand these sayings that the scriptures are speaking about, you have to be able to go back into the secular history and learn about, you know, about these things. All right. So, you know, pretty much that's been the lesson. You know, Lord's will, you know, you brothers have been edified. And to the next time I say, Shalom.